Welcome to the Antidote to Fear with Andrea Bordenca, CEO of IGL USA, and Suzanne Zeman, Master Somatic Coach. It's such a delight to have you with us.
I'd like to really welcome you here to the Institute for Generative Leadership. As Natalie mentioned, I'm the CEO of IGL USA. And what we do at the Institute for Generative Leadership is we build leadership skills through embodiment. And so everything that we do is actionable, it's observable, and it has results that are shown up in our behavior. So this conversation today is all about our relationship with fear. And there are certain ways that we respond, react, engage with fear. And we're going to be talking about two different types of fear tonight. Suzanne's going to go into that a little bit more in depth in just a few moments. By the end of today, you will be able to have a sense of how to be present with fear. We all have nervous systems, and our nervous systems are wired to keep us alive. So we have certain survival mechanisms. You've all heard of fight, flight, freeze, no doubt. And so oftentimes when we are faced with fear, what happens is we might contract. There are certain reactions that we have that in the moment when our amygdala is signaling to us that there is an issue here, that we might not know that we have choice in that. We might not realize in those moments, because our nervous system is so consumed and overwhelmed with the fear response, that sometimes it can be a barrier to us expanding, holding bigger promises in the world, leading teams. So Suzanne and I are going to explore with you the relationship with fear we have as human beings, and also we're going to give you very personal examples of how we have been present with fear, how we have moved with fear, and we're actually going to engage with you in an exercise so you can experience and observe being in fear with some practices at your disposal that you can access both today and afterwards. And you can take it to your classrooms, to your teams, to your coachees. So we will have live examples for you to practice with and play with today. And like we do at the Institute for Generative Leadership, is these are ways that we're building the neural pathways in your body so you can begin to practice recurrently with what you learned today. So it's not going to change your system in just this short hour here. It's just meant to give you a taste of something that you can take with you after today's session. So thank you for showing up and welcome. And I'm going to now pass it over to Suzanne, and I will be chatting with you in just a little while. Suzanne.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrea. I am a senior coach at the Institute, and I'm also a master somatic coach, as Andrea mentioned. And so I have written a book called Listening to Bodies, and I have designed a program called Listening to Bodies Long Distance that is designed to increase your sensitivity to be able to use the wisdom of your own body to help you open and clear barriers to being contracted or constrained. As Andrea mentioned, our work here at the Institute is about being generative. So fear is one of those emotional responses that hold us back from being able to be generative and step into new possibilities and ways that may be currently unknown to us. So what we're going to be looking at is not the kind of fear that is physical. For example, our bodies if we see a bus as we're crossing the street, our bodies naturally are going to pull us out of the way, and we might get an adrenaline surge. And there we know that the amygdala is really doing its job in getting us moved out of the way of the oncoming bus so that we're surviving. However, there is also a psychological fear, which can be just as immediate and just as strong in our bodies when the amygdala perceives something that looks like physical danger, but is related to something that happened in the past. So, for example, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was in a production of a play called Tom Thumb's Wedding. My mother was a singer, and so I always sang as a child with her, and she put me into this play to give me experience singing. So my job was to sing I Love You Truly as the bride and groom were marching down the aisle. And I looked out into the audience, and my friends were sitting right in the front row. And all of a sudden, my body started contracting, and I opened my mouth, and what came out was a squeak instead of a beautiful voice. And all my friends started laughing hysterically, and this flood of emotions came over me. I was ashamed, I was embarrassed, I was terrified, and frankly, to this day, I don't remember if I was able to sing at all in that moment. But what happened as a result was that I avoided being in front of groups of people at any cost. I can remember, for example, I was a research chemist, and my boss asked me to go to an international conference to present my work. And I said, absolutely not. I am not going to do that. And I realized that what happened to me when I was a child was still running my life. So when I was in my 30s, I decided enough is enough. And I went into training to lead seminars for large groups of people. The first time I stood up during that training in front of a group of my peers that were training with me, I stood up and my body started shaking, and I actually started crying, and I was frozen in position and I couldn't move. That's how strong that fear reaction overtook me. But as a result of that training and as a result of continuing to practice, I found ways to settle my body and to stay present in the moment. And that, friends, is the antidote to psychological fear, is being present in the moment. So what we will be doing in a few moments is an exercise based on the 5 anchors to being present from a book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. And it's a very powerful 5-step process to stay present in your body when you're feeling fear. Andrea, I know that you have an example as well of something that happened in your younger days that affected you.
Yes. So, there's different ways that we experience trauma, little traumas, big traumas in the body. And our nervous system has a way of keeping these imprinted. And so in Suzanne's example, it was this one event that she can recall. For me, I have a series of incidences during my childhood, both in school settings and also at home, where there were stories or feedback given to me of, some embarrassment, or I didn't know better, or I should know better. So when I would speak up in front of people, I would doubt myself. And so then I would start to shake and cry sometimes, or I just wouldn't speak at all, or I'd have these outbursts in my classroom when I was a student, because I was acting out to get attention, because I was trying to mitigate the shame and embarrassment when I didn't know the answer to certain problems when I was called upon. And so over time, when I became a young professional and coming into meetings or meeting with clients, I would contract in fear because I was perceiving that I didn't know enough. I had a story that I wasn't smart enough. I need to know the answer. So I was putting all this pressure on myself. And so when I recognized through my learning here at the Institute that I want to bring this work into the world because of those experiences that I had, not being able to speak my voice in a way that was listened, not being able to like have this power where I didn't know and I could ask for help in a safe way. Those were not modeled for me. So I wanted to learn how to provide a safe space for others to be able to say, you know what, I don't know. In our interpretation of what a leader is a leader is not an expert. A leader is someone who can show up in power, in being able to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but let's explore it together. But because I was putting on this pressure for myself to know, there was some shame and embarrassment when I was in public settings. So what I would do is I would go to town halls, I would go to my local gym, and I would ask questions. Even if I didn't have a question, my intention and my practice was to go to these events, to ask a question, to observe my body in the fear response. So what would happen, which was very familiar to me because this was how it was when I was growing up and I learned to avoid it and not engage here, was when I would speak up and ask a question, I would notice my heart rate. Just even when I was thinking about asking a question, my heart rate would increase, my breath would go up high, I was holding up here, and I couldn't even feel my feet, couldn't feel my lower body, and there was a gulp in my throat. My eyes would well up, I would turn all red. I would ask my question, knowing that I'm doing this intentionally to observe what's happening in my body. And we're going to do a practice, like Suzanne said, to anchor us in this. And so when I would ask my question, just for the sake of practice, because I want to learn how to be in front of people to bring this work into the world, I would observe what was happening in my body. And I was also trying to pay attention to the answer to my question. And oftentimes when I was beginning in this practice of discomfort, noticing the physiological response in my body, I couldn't hear the answer because I was so in fear and consumed. My body was so overwhelmed that I would just tune out and notice like, okay, that's over. I can sit down or I can breathe. Okay, settle in, notice what's happening. And the more I did that, and the more I observed my body, when I first did it, sometimes people would give me this response and I was looking for it of, oh my gosh, she's asking this question, or at least that was my perception. What is my identity? Oh my gosh, people think this question is stupid. And then I learned to say, you know what? I can ask this question because more often than not, it was a service to the people in the room, because oftentimes other people would have the question I did, but were in fear of asking it themselves. So that was not my intention with this. So then I learned to build this body of confidence, to ask these questions, to not be shy about it, and to notice what was happening. And the more that I noticed and realized, oh, I can celebrate, I'm still alive, I'm still breathing. The more I got comfortable, the more I expanded at my edge of comfort and discomfort. And now I can lead these sessions. I can be in person with hundreds of people. And yeah, I get excited and nervous, but it doesn't stop me. And my heart rate, I don't turn all red. You see, there's not tears welling up in my eye. I'm not in panic at all. I'm able to drop in, drop down, and have a very different presence because I was able to step into that edge, anchor my body in the practices we're going to do here, and move forward. So there is a way we can move here. Yes, Suzanne.
So as Andrea spoke, I'm sure that many of you could identify with some of the reactions that we have when fear emotionally overtakes us. our heartbeat increases, we get red, we contract. All those things are very natural. And yet they inhibit us for much of the time. Just like Andrea, I practiced and I practiced and I practiced until I was comfortable in front of groups of 200 to 300 people to this day. And I still also, I get a little nervous, I get a little flutter, you know, but that's my body telling me that it's ready. So I heard this definition from Bob Dunham, who apparently heard it from a somatic master whose name is Bert Bennett. And that is that fear is the body's way of telling us that it's not settled and ready to deal with what's happening in the moment. So then the question is, how do we bring our body to be able to be present with whatever emotions and sensations are flowing through us? So the first step is to settle our bodies. And how do we do this? First, notice how you're breathing right now. Many of us in our corporate environments are breathing up high in our chest. We're leaning forward. Our energy is up high, and we already have some constraint when we're doing that. So to begin this practice, let's first settle. And then what I'd like you to do is bring to mind an experience where you became afraid. Not a physical fear of something coming at you or hitting you, but a fear of something that you were about to do, or a conversation that you found yourself in where you got scared and it didn't feel safe. What happened to your body? See if you can put yourself in that moment. You might want to even close your eyes and think of an example. Good. So from the 5 steps to anchor in the present that I mentioned earlier, the first anchor is to soothe yourself, to quiet your mind, calm your heart, and settle your body. And how do we do this? We do this with breathing practices. Drop your breath into your torso and drop it down even further, all the way down into your belly. And notice what happens as you do that. As soon as we drop our breath, our awareness comes down. And one of the principles of somatic work is that energy follows awareness. So as soon as you drop your breath, drop your awareness into your belly, and the whole upper part of your body begins to release and settle. Feel your feet on the ground. Bring your awareness into your feet and legs. And again, there's a relaxation that occurs, a settling. So every time I say settle your body, bring your awareness to your breath and to your feet. That's the first anchor, settling. The second anchor is simply to notice. Notice all of the sensations that are happening in your body. You might notice tingling. You might notice a constraint in the solar plexus area, for example, is one place. And as you notice these sensations, instead of reacting to them, as we often do, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm afraid. I'm noticing all this constraint. allow your body to settle and simply become aware. This takes practice. So don't worry if your awareness is limited right now. We have ways of helping you have the practices that bring these sensations more to the forefront so that you can observe them, so that you're listening to the wisdom of your body. The third anchor is to accept the discomfort. In our training in many of our families, we have been trained to suppress discomfort. We've been trained to suppress our emotions. Children should be seen and not heard, for example. Yeah, many of us heard this as children. Or if we were running around with our excitement, we were told to sit down and sit still. So we learned to hold ourselves together. And yes, there was benefit in the socialization of those practices. However, now we still have those same reactions in our neurology. So when we observe and when we feel what's happening in our bodies, we're creating new neuronal pathways to help us be present in the moment. And this, again, is the antidote to fear. When we're present, when we're feeling what's happening, we're not afraid. We're feeling, we're noticing, we're observing, we're seeing the flow. And those responses are moving through us rather than we are reacting to what's stuck in our bodies. The fourth anchor, stay present. Stay present as we move and unfold with those reactions. And we're present to what those reactions are. We're noticing our sensations. We're feeling what we're feeling. And then the fifth anchor is to safely discharge what we're feeling. So for example, we might shake. So if you're feeling those reactions that you were feeling, shake your body. Shake, 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 shake your arms. Let yourself shake out that excess energy that's flowing through you. And notice what happens as you do that. And then let yourself settle even further. Settle in the moment. Settle to being fully present. Allow yourself to open and expand. These are the practices that we will be learning in our 6 weeks program called Listening to Bodies. Andrea, what are you wanting to add here?
Yeah, so this is something that we offer. We go deeper in, and in this moment now, curiosity that I have. Well, there's a statement first. One is, as social mammals, this is, and as human beings, we learn to override these responses. Like Suzanne said, when discomfort happens, we avoid, we shrink, we contract. And instead of being present to and moving with, and we have a handout that Suzanne has put together from the book that she referred to, My Grandmother's Hands, that we will send to you after. We haven't figured out how to post it here in the chat, but we will send it to you. That's a promise. And so as human beings who learn how to brilliantly socialize and adapt to survive and fit in and belong in the environments, like if the story was children should be seen and not heard, as an example. So we learn to hold our breath or don't cry. In my house, it was don't cry. So I learned how to hold my breath And so all of my energy went up here, and I built this armoring in my upper body where I would hold it, but I would go to anger really quickly. And so in this, the shaking and this safely discharging is what deer do, is what bunnies do. If you watch nature videos of animals, when they're being chased or playing dead as their nervous system response, once the predator is gone, they get up, they shake it off, and they're fine. We don't typically do that. We don't learn that because we learn how to socialize and override it because we're so brilliant with the evolution of our brains that we can ignore that. So this part of the shaking and safely discharging allows us to move through it. So just a question, I'd love to hear you in the chat, and also you can take yourself off of mute, I believe, and become a panelist if you'd like to engage in a conversation here. I'd love to hear what you noticed in that exercise that Suzanne walked you through in recalling an event that may have induced some fear for you. And as she walked through the different stages, what did you notice? Did you notice any shifts, or was it difficult for you to notice what was happening in the body, which when we engage in new practices, totally normal, common response, but just wanted to check in to say, what was that practice like for you? And what are you observing as we're in this conversation today? And Natalie, if you could guide us in the,
Of
there's anyone with
course.
their
I
hands up.
see Chris said very calming. And Marie said instant shift of energy. And you are welcome to join Suzanne and Andrea if you'd like to speak or be on video. Just let me know. Oh, and Ruth said I could feel tingling in my feet.
Yeah, very good. Very good. These are common responses. And every time we practice, our bodies become more sensitive to be able to feel what's happening. So that the next time you stand up in front of your team or a group to do a presentation, you'll notice these sensations, but they will be lessened. And if you keep practicing, before you know it, you'll be able to stand up and you won't even have those reactions. That's the beauty of paying attention to the wisdom of your body.
And something that I love to share in my own experience here is that I used to suffer from chronic lower back pain. And what I learned, I didn't realize this was so until I started doing more of these practices of tuning in and noticing, moving through, is that I was holding on to certain things because of that holding my breath response, that my body was so tense that I had issues with my intestinal issues, but also lower back issues. I don't have those anymore. So there's a real power to tuning into what's happening in the body, which is why Suzanne mentioned the Listening to Bodies course that she pioneered just about 20 years ago. Yeah, 20 years ago, that we offer through the Institute, thanks to Suzanne, because this work is so important as we're modeling it for those in our organizations, how we show up, also the kids in our classrooms and in our homes. So it starts with us being aware of it because our nervous systems are broadcasting. So if we're holding on to those, we're teaching others to hold on to it too. So the more we can move through it, be with it, be present with it, and discharge it and practice in this space, the more that other people will feel safe to do that too and not hold on and have all these issues that lead to sickness, autoimmune diseases in the body.
Very good. So do we have any questions?
We have a lot more comments. Let's see if that's okay. Should I share some more comments?
Please.
So actually, Deborah, one of our participants in the Listening to Bodies long distance series said that practice made me realize that I am safe. Going into my body gets me out of my head and the stories. And then,
Beautiful.
yeah, and William said the presence of whole body, and Cindy being in the moment and really listening into my body. Terrific, a structure, a process.
So remember that when we get afraid, we're afraid, psychological fear we're talking about, not a bus coming at us. When we get afraid, we fear some consequence in the future. So paying attention to our body brings us into the present moment. And here we are. As Andrea said, I'm still breathing, I'm still alive, I'm here, I'm present, and yay, I can take action. I can lead this team. I can offer what it is that my heart wants to offer. I can fulfill my purpose here instead of closing up and stepping away and being afraid. Good.
And we have someone, let's see. Would love to know, Ruth would love to know about the impact of increased oxygen to tissues with the deep breathing, Suzanne.
Yeah, very good. So, of course, oxygen is regenerating, and we want to maximize the efficiency of our breathing. So in the Listening to Bodies course, we also do breathing practices so that you can experience what I call full torso breathing. And I work in the program with different levels of breathing. So there's high level breathing, which is all the way up in the chest, and what we find ourselves doing when we get anxious. And then there's mid-level breathing, where we use our ribs and we expand out and we can contain everything that we're committed to in all the worlds that we're part of. And then we can drop our breath all the way down into our belly. And when we do full torso breathing, we're using all of our torso, starting in the belly. So we can do this. So start with exhaling completely, and then bring your breath from your belly to your midsection, up into your chest. Hold, and then exhale slowly. And as you're slowly exhaling, you're also stimulating the vagus nerve, which is also called the soul nerve. It's the longest nerve in the body and goes from the top of the spine all the way down to the end of the spine, with nerves branching off the vagus nerve. So when you're doing full torso breathing and exhaling slowly, you're stimulating your whole nervous system and bringing it to a calm presence, which as leaders is the stance that we wish to take. It's when we are most available, but when we are also strongest in our bodies and in our presence. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I saw a question about if you're in a meeting, and I saw Sonia chatted that you can rock. And so it can be a gentle rocking to discharge if you're in a meeting. And also a way to tap into that vagus nerve to anchor yourself is you can orient. So if you, and you can do this right now, if you turn your head to the left and you find an object, I'm looking at an exit sign, non-judgmentally, and just noticing it, and then turning my head to the right and looking at a water bottle on the windowsill, just noticing it. So this is something that taps into our vagus nerve, and is a way, if you're in a meeting or in a conversation where you're noticing fear, that you can tap into that to help anchor you. And also through your breath, like Suzanne just demonstrated, is if you're noticing you're in a conversation with your boss or somebody else, and you find that your nervous system is being activated, then a way is to do that full torso drop in. And the key here too is that we can access this, like Suzanne said, in our neuronal pathways when we practice outside of a panic situation. So when we are in a situation where we're noticing the fear, so when I would show up and ask these questions, I had these practices to breathe. And at first it was difficult for me. It was a challenge for me to do that, but I stuck with it. And then when I wasn't in those moments where I was activated, when I was home, waking up in the morning, just doing the dishes, I would practice deliberately settling in and breathing and dropping down. Because if you haven't noticed, I tend to be very high energy and I go up in my voice. I get excited. And so the deliberate practice of noticing that and then dropping in when appropriate helps me access that when I notice the psychological fear response show up. So the practice outside of these situations will help you be able to access it when you're in those situations.
Good. So practice is the key here to mastering the ability to observe what's happening in your body. And in the world of somatics, what we have learned is that it takes 300 repetitions until your body starts to develop some level of comfort with the new practice. So in the class that Andrea and I both teach, we will be repeating these practices and building each week to give you a new level of practice so that your body continues to become not only more sensitive, but you're constantly developing the observer that you are, not only for your own body, but then you're able to observe others. And for those of you who are coaches or managers working with other people, you will become very sensitive to noticing what's happening with the people that you're interacting with so that you can help them to also become more present in the moment with you and with others in their environment. And that's what we're interested in providing for you, is practices and ways that you can be more effective in your world.
Suzanne, we
Yes.
also have a question from, let's see, William. And William, if you want to join Suzanne and Andrea, or anybody wants to join, please let me know and we can turn on your video. But William had a question about how do you perceive our moods and emotions impacting fear? I found that shifting my thought process, for example, from anxiety to eagerness, in preparing for a major presentation with large groups, helped open up my body to be more in the present moment.
Yes, beautiful. So we differentiate between moods and emotions. Moods are contextual. In other words, moods have to do with our history, our family of origin, the environment that we're in. And emotions are much quicker. So an emotion will be triggered by something that happens. Something that happens outside of us triggers us. So we could be happy when an event occurs that is something that we wanted to have happen, for example. Or we could get very sad by something that happens, especially to a loved one, as another example. But emotions are fleeting. Moods are a lot deeper. So what we're talking about here is emotional fear. It gets triggered in the moment by something that we're afraid is going to happen. And using these 5 anchors can help us discern and feel what is happening in our bodies to help us change those pathways, which over time can also help us change our mood. So I can give you an example of that. When I was younger, my dad would come home from work and we would sit down to dinner, and all I would hear were his complaints about work. And this one did this, and this one did that, and the boss didn't help, and blah, blah, blah. And as you can hear, I'm already, my shoulders are sinking, my head is going down, and there was a mood of resignation. It's like, nothing can be done here. I don't have any power. I have no impact. So as I was in my work, I found myself automatically going into that same liturgy. And at the end of my day at work, I would be complaining to my family about all of the negative things that were going on. And it was like, no, this isn't working. I started a practice of gratitude, and I kept a journal for an entire year. At the end of the day, I would journal about all the wonderful things that I was grateful for in my day. And sure enough, after a year, I did not find myself in a mood of resignation. And in fact, not only was I grateful, I found myself acknowledging other people in my work for what they were doing that was really great and that contributed to the team. And the mood of the whole team started shifting. So we have these practices as generative leaders to help you shift your productivity and your team's productivity, and for you to become the kind of leader that can have this happen. So, Andrea, I see you agreeing, and I know that this is what we're here for. This is what we want to provide and give to you.
Yes. And this, I came into this work and this, we live in language. And that's the first thing that I learned here at the Institute. And at the time I was a manager at an organization that I'm now the CEO of. So I'm the CEO of 2 organizations. And when I was first in this executive position at that organization before coming on to IGL, I lived in resentment. And so in this mood of same sort of patterning in growing up was hearing all of the things like it's other people's faults, comparing to other people. And so I grew up with that lens, and I didn't know it. I just thought that's the way that the world was, but that was just the way the world was showing up to me. So then as an executive, manager to executive, I had this lens of resentment, like what's wrong with everybody else? Why aren't they listening? Why aren't we productive? Why isn't their work ethic like my work ethic? And so I was quick to anger. So this lens of understanding how our mood and our background shapes us and building this awareness that happens through the body by becoming aware of the stories that we're living in can help us have a new range of entering into these situations. So yeah, it turned around my company and just impacted all of my relationships in really profound ways. So that's why I'm here. That's why I do the work that I do. So I'm just nodding like, yes, like this is, sometimes I can take that for granted because it was in the past. And yeah, so just acknowledging the gratitude and for this work and for this, Suzanne, that you created for me and the Institute.
What's amazing about this work is that it really is simple. It may not be easy in the beginning, but the practices are simple practices, and they're practices that we can all do literally wherever we are. You can be sitting in a meeting and dropping your breath. And as you relax and release, especially if you're leading the meeting, you can watch the room and everybody will start to relax with you. You can have that impact simply with the strength of your own presence. And that's what is so beautiful about these practices. I have had many of the leaders that I've worked with start their meetings, their team meetings, by saying, let's just all take a breath together before we jump in. And for those of you who are studying at the Institute, you know that Bob Dunham starts every meeting with, let's take a breath together, right? And throughout the conferences, let's just take a moment to breathe and settle ourselves. And when you do that, it changes the dynamic of the interactions that we can have. And everything becomes so much easier and more satisfying. So that's our commitment here. We want you to have the kinds of lives where you are satisfied with what you've accomplished and what you're able to generate for yourself and for others. What else do we have, Natalie?
A lot of kudos, excellent presentation, most helpful. Thank you. It's a practice. Oh, I think this is beautiful. It's a practice that's accessible anywhere, anytime. Let's see.
Does anyone, are there any situations or any any questions? You know, we're here, we want to be accessible to you. Natalie put the information about the upcoming course that Suzanne is leading. So that's there available to you, but we're here as your resource. So if there's anything you want us to walk through with you, please, this is your time. And notice if that makes you nervous. Notice if there's fear there. Maybe that's an opportunity to say, let me step in and observe and ask that question that I might be afraid to ask.
Yes, I noticed also if you're a coach and an ICF member, this course is endorsed for 12 CCEUs in core competencies. So that's the icing on the cake. You get to practice and you get credit for your practices.
And Ruth says, I love the idea of starting meetings with everyone taking a breath.
Yeah, because how many times do we come into meetings and people were on their phones and they're texting and their heads are down and you know they're in some conversation but not the one that we're here for, right? So when we take a breath together, here we are, we're present, we can connect, we can listen to what our cares and concerns are, we can help each other. It becomes so much easier. And then meetings are not a waste of time. We can be more efficient and we become more generative.
And William says, why do you think it's so difficult for many, if not most people, to truly be in the present moment?
Because we're not taught to be. We're taught to be doers. We're taught to be constantly in motion. We're constantly on to the next thing. We're constantly in the fast food culture. We want to learn quickly. We want to grab on. We want to get better. We want to know everything. We want to move forward. We want to look good. And we don't take the moment to just settle and relax and enjoy what we already know and what we already have learned. And then we can ask for help if we need it. We can be more vulnerable. We can be safe where we are. But we have not been taught to do that. And that's why it's so important to learn these fundamental practices.
And John has a question, a wonderful question. He said, I often present online and find it hard to connect with people on the screen. I notice myself getting tense, looking at the screen rather than connecting to a human. He'd love to hear how you might work with this challenge?
Well, it's interesting because when we're online, we also, when we're in Zoom, for example, right now, I can see myself and I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to myself. So I give clients a practice of talking into the mirror and becoming present with the person in the mirror. And at first it's like, ooh, I don't like how I look, or you start noticing all your flaws or all the things like that are off. But after a while, you can actually connect with yourself, with the person in the mirror. And it's a beautiful way, for example, in the morning to greet the day. Every morning, I look in the mirror and I say, today, I choose to love my life. I got this from Carol Burnett, by the way, the comedian.
Huh.
And it is amazing. When you set up your day like that, you're empowering yourself. You're giving yourself authority to move into your day with joy and compassion.
That's
So,
beautiful. For Zoom, there's an option to hide self view. But
ah,
I love that though, because I find that if I have my self view, my tendency is to disconnect. So when I hide the self view, then I'm looking around and I'm connecting. I'm not as self-conscious. But now that Suzanne, you just introduced that new practice, I sort of want to check that out and have a conversation with myself to be more present instead of using it as a distraction. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
yeah, good. And then you actually can extend energetically. And we do some of these practices also in the Listening to Bodies program so that you can connect. And like in this moment, I want you to feel me and connect. You can do that. I am extending, I am holding, and we're connected. Good. Now, listening to bodies does not happen on Zoom. It happens through phone connections or Zoom without video. And I've designed it that way purposely because we are trained in our culture to connect through our eyes. And a much more powerful way to connect is from your center, from your belly, extending out. And that way, it's a whole body connection. And that's what we want to practice when we're working with bodies.
Suzanne,
Yes.
let's see. I just want to share. Let's see. John said, what a wonderful answer. Thank you. And then Ruth said, any tips for one-on-one difficult conversations with team members, such as delivering bad news, a cut of a position, non-promotion, that understandably will cause a very emotional response from the employee? How to settle them and refocus from the trauma or traumatic emotion.
Yeah, very good. And of course, this is true for any situation that can be difficult, even with if you're a parent with your child who's acting out or whatever. The first step, of course, is to be settled, to be fully present yourself, and to be present to the emotions that happen for the other so that you can create a safe space to help hold what's happening. Now, this is not always easy because we can't predict what's going to happen with the other person. They might actually be relieved to hear bad news, thinking that they've kept this all very private and nobody knows, and all of a sudden their worst nightmare is revealed, right? Sometimes that's a relief. And sometimes you can even bring a touch of humor to the situation if you have some remedial program to help them practice in ways that will help them get over the situation that has created some negative consequence for themselves or for the team. Knowing that you as their manager you want them to be successful, right? So you're going to be offering some ways to help them. It's not always easy because it's frightening to sometimes deliver bad news, right? But as leaders, this is part of our job. And if we set the right context and then hold that safe space, we can then together coordinate and find then what's the best path of action going forward. Andrea, I'm sure you have some examples of
I
this.
do. And I see we're at the top of the hour. So if you do need to leave, take care of what you need to take care of. I'll share a couple of things. Sometimes people will say to me, what are your tips for letting people go? And I say, my tip is to give yourself the afternoon space. Like if you're letting someone go in the morning, make sure you have space for yourself to settle, to process, or the next day or that evening, because it is a breakup. And even though it is deserved or you're looking forward to it, it's still a breakup and a completion of a relationship. And the body goes through the processes, and you might be surprised by that. And so, like Suzanne said, setting that container for holding that this is the right thing to do, it's going to best serve me, this organization, the team, and staying with that story and doing it in a way where it's dignified, of course, where it's having a conversation about honesty, like this is why it's happening, and knowing that the person is going to have the reaction they have, and that it's not our job to take responsibility for that, but to rather allow what needs to happen, to stay true to our convictions, to our care, what is best. And sometimes in times where it's been very difficult for me to let somebody go, if I had to do a layoff and I didn't want to, that I would write down notes just because I knew it would be emotional for me. So I could stay centered and refer to my notes if I got lost or consumed by the sadness or the anxiety of it, to stay present with the breathing, and to also refer to my notes so I could stay true to what it was that I was looking to produce, and the outcome. But for me, the biggest thing is to give yourself space, not to have it be, a conversation in your calendar and then a typical meeting after, but to allow yourself some space to process it yourself as well.
Good. I know we're at the end of our session, so I would just like to say that if you have any additional questions, Natalie, please put my email in the chat. And also when we send out the 5 steps to anchor in the present, Natalie, if you could just, that will have my contact information on it as well. And I'm happy to respond to your questions, and especially if you have questions about the Listening to Bodies class, please engage with me and let's talk. All right, well, thank you all very much. It's been a quick and wonderful hour. I appreciate all the comments and questions. And Andrea and Natalie, thank you both very much for the time that we've had together.
Thank you. I always enjoy doing these with you, Suzanne. Thank you. And thank you, Natalie, for moderating.
Oh, I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you. Such a delight to have everyone join us. Thank you all.